Director and co-writer Mark Andrew Hammer brings us science fiction body horror Replicator, a 2024 low budget, somewhat gross movie. What is the story? Well, it primarily focuses on a solicitor called Darby, whose kind of life has been up and down, you might say, and she's recently reconnected with her father, who has told her that he has some form of cancer, and she's invited him to live with her, but he's a little bit of a difficult individual, you might say. And one day she comes home from work and he appears to have died, but in sort of grotesque and mysterious circumstances. It almost looks like a tumour has kind of erupted from him, and there's kind of blackish purple liquid everywhere, and yeah, it's all pretty disgusting. And it turns out that he might have actually been replicated by some type of entity which seemed to be targeting morally corrupt people and almost having an invasion of the body snatchers like replacement style character come out who seems to be better. And this Darby seems to be caught up in the middle of it, as there might be more than one person that she's known who has been affected by this organism. What will happen? You'll have to watch the movie and find out. So let's talk about it. Body horror. It's all been the rage with the substance, obviously, quite recently. So it's probably on the forefront of many horror fans' minds. And this being a lower budget film, you know, it's understandable it might not be to quite that sort of standard, but I've got to say, you know, it's some good, practical, gory, gooey VFX here. And, you know, it'll remind you a little bit of the work of Brian Usner to a certain degree, I would say, for any of you horror aficionados. It has more of a late 80s, 90s kind of vibe to it, to a degree, because I think that obviously the lower budget sort of side of stuff. And it certainly has more an element of schlock in it. But I've got to say the effects here are suitably gooey and grotesque, and even in the opening sequence it appears that this entity is sort of dissolving humans and, let's say, growing them again and things like that. Yeah, it's a kind of gooey, fun prospect. You might even say somewhat Lovecraftian to a degree. So the VFX are kind of quite fun, and we see a reasonable amount of with them. The movie tries to have a little bit of a mystery about what's actually going on. I will say I don't think it's entirely successful with this, because I think it ends up making itself, the movie asks more questions than it really provides answers. But there is a degree of a mystery here, and there's certain elements of sound which appear to play a pertinent part in the story, as a medical examiner manages to identify certain patterns of sound which seem to play some type of part in the proceedings, which again gives it this kind of interesting kind of element. And what is this entity? Is it an alien? Is it some sort of, you know, angelic presence? Is it just some sort of mutation? You know, what's actually kind of going on here? I will say I think our character of Darby makes for a very likeable and down-to-earth central character. She seems quite realistic in some ways. Like, for example, she's a solicitor or a lawyer, and we see her in a case at the beginning that she doesn't win, so she's not some like super, you know, successful kind of like you know highfalutin type. You know, she has a reasonable apartment, but she still looks like she relies a little bit too much on alcohol and things like that. She obviously has a fractious relationship with her father, and I like the way she plays it. This actress plays a kind of like very much an everyday style kind of character who, you know, just wants to kick back and enjoy the time of her friend, and is stressful, has these, you know, relationships which are not always healthy. So I actually found the character of Darby quite a relatable character in some ways. And as to be fair, I think some of the relationships with other characters, again, seem complex. Like she's kind of having an affair with a married police officer, and although he's cheating on his wife, there's accusations of corruption in regards to him, but he still ends up doing some good stuff in regards to the investigation to her father and stuff, and it looks like he is trying to help. So I like the fact that our characters are multifaceted and they're not just like good guys or bad guys, or at least that's how it appears. And there's morally grey areas in these people, and I think the movie is trying to obviously have some sort of commentary on the nature of morality here, as this entity is trying to target morally corrupt people, but then, obviously who is the judge of that, really, I suppose. So I think there are elements of the story which I did sort of quite like, and it has a mystery, albeit it's not kind of a fully formed mystery. I like our kind of central characters. Some of the other characters are a little goofier, but I at least like our central character. So this to me is a movie which has elements that are actually quite good in the movie, but when you bring them together, it's a little bit of a kind of a messy movie in some ways. And this brings me to what doesn't work. I feel the main thing for me is the tonal inconsistency with this film, because there are times where you feel this movie is taking itself somewhat seriously. The character of Darby, there's a few semi-comedic moments, but she appears to be played relatively straight and kind of quite a vulnerable character in some ways, but who can kind of soldier on. But there are elements here in characters that just seem very, very goofy. Her father, the first introduction to her father, again, it's played for kind of like gross out laughs. And it's just like a real inconsistency in the movie's like humour versus the kind of like the semi-serious tone that it sort of takes. And you're never quite sure, is this a schlocky B movie, or is this a movie where we're supposed to be sort of taking things kind of quite seriously? Because the movie seems like it can never really decide on what kind of tone this wants to be. I understand that there may be some comedic elements in movies that do take themselves somewhat sort of seriously, but it's just a general sort of, it's just sort of goofy hyper reality where you can't, you're not supposed to take things seriously, or is this a kind of a serious movie but with some very, very over exaggerated characters? I never really felt like the movie fully kind of landed in any particular one camp. And also, which I think is also not particularly well defined about, is what is actually kind of going on with this entity. It's some kind of entity. Don't really know why, what it wants, where it's come from, how long it's been there. Does it have? Is it altruistic, or does it have other kind of motivations? Again, it just seems very vague. And then we have this element of this kind of this sound, this kind of audio, or kind of it responds to frequencies, and I feel it's something that's kind of introduced, but then nothing is really done with it. It seems to kind of have a little bit of a disposition to some sounds, but it never really affects the plot all that much. And I just felt it's one of these things where it kind of feels like this is some kind of X-Files mystery, where we're going to have these patterns of sound and stuff, which is making the kind of liquid appear in a certain way, but I felt it just kind of introduces it and then doesn't really do anything with it. And it's just, you just feel a bit unsatisfied with the movie. I think some of the kind of the tonal inconsistencies make the acting seem a little bit hit and miss as well. I actually don't think the acting was all that bad, if I'm honest, but I think the mix of sometimes it's serious and sometimes it's kind of goofy, again, it just leaves this kind of disconnect, I gotta say. And it does feel like the world is, certainly in regards to this movie, seems to be orbiting this Darby, and there is characters here that you know, this Darby doesn't really seem to have any actual kind of connection to this entity, but things just seem to happen to characters around her for no particular reason other than just circumstance. It's a kind of like, well, why though? Is it something about this Darby which doesn't really seem to have, you know. So I feel this movie is just lacking in direction, both in the script and just the way the movie is actually kind of portrayed to us. I would say it's somewhat of an entertaining movie for visual spectacle. I like the character of Darby, but the story just doesn't seem like it's particularly kind of well thought out, and the kind of the tonal inconsistencies make me question some of the directorial choices here as well. So overall, it's a messy but somewhat enjoyable movie. I will give it a 5 out of 10. Have you seen it? What did you think of it? Please leave me a comment and I'll look forward to seeing you next time.